o'clock. I want to welcome everybody to the Athenaeum of Philadelphia. If you don't know who I am, I'm Beth Hessel, the Executive Director. We also have Tess Galen, our Events Coordinator, and Natalie Gearin, who is our special guest today, who is our Membership and Development Associate. It's a thrill to have you here. The Athenaeum normally is open. We're closed now until October, but still providing as much as we can virtually, including programs, until we reopen in October with some amazing renovations. I invite you to go to our website, philathenaeum.com, and click on 21st Century Athenaeum to see those changes that will be happening. In the meantime, we have this program today, which is very special. Natalie Gearin joined the Athenaeum last fall as our new Membership and Development Associate and has been doing a fantastic job from day one. All of you who've met her know what a wonderful addition to our staff she is. Natalie comes to us with a BA in Art History and Global Studies from Temple and an MA in Art History and Museum Studies from Tufts. She's worked in a number of museums and galleries in Philadelphia and Boston, including the Philadelphia Museum of Art. This talk today comes from her master's thesis at Tufts, in which she looked at the aesthetics of conspiracy theories online and their websites. I don't want to give away all that she'll be talking about. However, her discussion of this topic was so interesting to board members and I, as we were interviewing her and as we've talked with her since then, that we invited her to give this talk at the Athenaeum. Little did we know it would align with the congressional hearings, as Jay Stiefel pointed out. But I am glad that you're all here. Natalie will give her talk, and then I will moderate Q&A when she is done with her talk, and I'm sure you'll have lots of questions. But want to invite you all to virtually join me in welcoming Natalie Gearin to the Athenaeum's at Noon programming. Welcome, Natalie.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Tess. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here virtually with you, even though I can't see you. So as Beth mentioned, before I was at the Athenaeum, I was a grad student in art history. And so what I'm presenting today is a little slice of what my thesis was at the end of my master's program. And so as it turns out, my project ultimately did kind of dovetail not only with current events, but some of the items that we have in our collections at the Athenaeum, which I found to be really interesting. So we're going to kind of see how my project and the Athenaeum can kind of be considered together. So we're going to be looking or talking a little bit about how online conspiracy communities have made the jump from, oh, did I freeze? No, from online to real life, into public space, and getting into the visual culture behind these conspiracy communities. So I just want to say I've spent a lot of time thinking critically about conspiracies and how they come to bear in our lives. It just doesn't mean that I'm a conspiracy theorist myself, like disclaimer, they didn't hire a conspiracy theorist at the Athenaeum or anything. And I know that conspiracy theories and theorists, they can pose a real danger to people. They can pose real harm, as we can see from January 6th. It was a violent event. And, so I want to say I take this stuff seriously. But I think that what I'm trying to do here is engage a little bit more with this phenomenon a bit more thoroughly in order to better understand it and maybe even better address it. So let's get started. Oops, here we go. Okay, so I'm sure many of you are here know that at the Athenaeum we have the Thomas Usick Walter collection. So it's a trove of objects and documents related to the architect Thomas Usick Walter. And so he's responsible for the expansion of the US Capitol and the new dome in the mid-19th century. If you've been in the building recently, you've seen this. It's framed in the entrance hall, and we have the real thing in our collection storage. Thomas Usick Walter is also responsible for lots of different projects in the Philadelphia area too, which my colleague Candace, she'll be talking about Girard College next week, same time, same place. So just be back on Zoom then to learn more about him. But so this is, of course, is a rendering of Usick Walter's Capitol project, so the expansion and the new dome. Another thing we have in our collection that I kind of discovered for myself, this is new to me, we have a series of as-built photographs, that's what they're called, So these images reflect the completed project versus what was actually designed or planned. So anyone who's done like a big construction project, I'm sure that the plans don't always fit the as-built condition. So that's the purpose of a photograph like this one. It just shows the as-built condition of the statuary hall in the Capitol on December 4th, 1897. So it was really this building, the Capitol building, and what happened within this building on January 6th that got me to think really seriously about ideas related to conspiracy and how they can spill out into public space, from the internet into public space. Really like the paragon of public space, if you think about the Capitol building symbolically. I'd been researching conspiracy for a while before, even before the 2020 election, before January 6th. It was something that I was interested in, but it felt like kind of a self-contained project, like a hobby of mine, just something that I was interested in and something insular. Until on January 6th, I was watching the news and I saw this photograph and I realized that I knew this guy in the middle. I don't know, what that says about me, I'm not sure, but I recognized him. And that's because in my kind of preliminary research related to conspiracy, I'd seen him all over the place. He is known formerly as the Q shaman, and he was sort of like a mascot or like a parade marshal almost for events that were held by the QAnon conspiracy community. And he doesn't do this anymore. He's actually in jail for being in this building on that day. So he's no longer involved. But it was really when I saw this guy in the Capitol and I had recognized him, I thought, okay, this is just kind of my pet project, but maybe now it's time to start thinking a bit more seriously because, before it was maybe a niche group of people who knew who someone like this guy was, but now it's national news and millions of people are seeing, this guy who's a representative of this conspiracy kind of community. So that's what got me thinking, how did we end up here? Like just thinking about this image, how did we end up, in this kind of space right now? So how did we get from here in 1897 to here, or from here to here, or from here to here? And that's what caused me to, kind of delve into things with my thesis project. So, and I think whether we like it or not at the Athenaeum, we're stewards of this building's history. And that means we're stewards of this history, January 6th. It just because it kind of deviates from traditional Capitol history, so to speak, we can engage more deeply with the events of that day because we have so much related to this building. So I think it's worth getting to know this little sliver, or now it's actually, the hearings are going on now, it's been over a year. So this more substantial sliver, I think it's worth getting to know it just a little bit better. So of course, at the time as an art history student, I turned towards images and visual culture to guide my research. So I started with QAnon and other related kind of satellite communities on the internet, and worked backwards from January 6th and like election fraud conspiracies, backwards much further. So as it turns out, there's a pretty significant body of art online that's created by and for people who are interested in this kind of conspiratorial knowledge. Either they're believers or they're interested in becoming believers. They're kind of like conspiracy curious. So in terms of what I'm going to show you today, I'll show you a couple examples of conspiracy-driven artworks or infographics, and then a handful of ways of interpreting them or understanding them, maybe the impulses that kind of drive them. And then if you are really interested in this kind of stuff and you want to look more into it, but you don't really feel like, crawling through like the dark recesses of the internet to do so, I don't blame you. There are some artists who I think are great artists who deal in these kinds of themes, but from sort of a safe, critical distance, who I would definitely recommend checking out, if you want to stay offline, which is probably a smart choice. So let's take a look at some examples. Now, okay. These are really overwhelming. They were never really meant to be looked at on a PowerPoint slide. So if you're looking at this and you're like, I don't know what I'm looking at, it's okay. I'll zoom into some details so that we can look more closely. But so what is this? This is the Q web. And this was created by the artist Dylan Lewis Monroe. The first iteration is from 2017. This one, the color-coded one, is from 2018. And I think this one, not that I think it's better, but it's more visually compelling, I guess. And so this was made right at the time that the QAnon conspiracy theory was really taking off. And for those of you who need a refresher or just don't know, QAnon essentially refers to a far-right conspiracy theory that Donald Trump is combating a sinister and deep state kind of cabal of leftists and elites, or elite leftists. And essentially the thrust of the theory is that the mass arrest of the elites and sort of their comeuppance will trigger amongst the public what's known as the Great Awakening, at which point everyone will realize the true nature of the government and of the deep state, at which point we'll all be kind of free of their control. So Q claimed to be an individual. It was probably multiple people, but adherents to the theory thought it was one person. He claimed to be one person with high-level security clearance, and Q would post like pretty frequently very vague and cryptic messages online that people would try to decode. And in so much as it could be a cohesive community online, it has kind of fallen off a bit since Trump lost in 2020 and since January 6th. But of course, the damage has been done and the groundwork has been laid, obviously, for this ongoing really deep skepticism. So let's take a look at a detail. So you'd find this online as a PDF. It's meant to be like free downloadable PDF that you would just look at on your computer, basically. It's color coded by theme. And again, if you're looking at this and you're like, what is this? I sympathize. I spent a long time digging into these and I really only scratched the surface. So they're color coded by area, kind of by theme. So this little corner is like ancient conspiracy theories. So, the lost city of Atlantis, or like, I don't know, aliens built the pyramids in Egypt, that kind of stuff. So you start there, but where you end up is here. There's another corner that specifically lays the groundwork for skepticism related to election rigging and election fraud. And, everyone knows the refrain, drain the swamp. All of that stuff is kind of, the seed is kind of planted here. And this is back in 2017, well before the election in 2020. So the groundwork was laid well in advance. And of course, well in advance of January 6th as well. So who made this? The person who made this is Dylan Lewis Monroe. He describes himself as an intuitive artist and truth activist. He went to fashion school. He got a BFA in fashion design from Parsons. And he actually had a pretty good career in fashion design. He can't really pursue that anymore. He will not get hired. But as far as I'm aware, he is fine with that and this kind of new direction that his life has taken. He credits a specific time in his life for when he, went down the rabbit hole, basically. So he was living in New York City. He was freelancing at the time. His apartment was tiny and it was surrounded by cell phone towers. So if he looked out his window, he would just see cell towers everywhere. And he developed eczema and anxiety, and he attributed those kind of physical symptoms to the cell phone towers and the built environment around him. On top of that, he lived downtown in Manhattan, right near the construction site for what's now One World Trade. And that got him thinking about 9/11 conspiracy theories. And once he started digging into that, it was like off to the races. And since then, this has been his life. And, his magnum opus, the Q Web, is specifically used to awaken people to this version of reality that he and his contemporaries are promoting. So I'll show you one more example. This one's a little bit easier on the eyes, I think, but not by much. This is called the Great Awakening Map. This was created just a few months after the Q Web by an artist named Parinya. And I'll show you a detail. So he also kind of refers to this as a tool for awakening humanity. He also says that he created this whole image over the course of one weekend, which, if true, is remarkable. I would be astounded. But so Again, kind of same deal. You would find this online as a PDF, free to download. The point is that it's easy to access, and it's meant to be circulated very widely, again, to awaken people to, these various tidbits of information that is not, that you'd be missing out on, really, that isn't in history books, that you wouldn't be taught in school, for good reason, but there's a whole trove of knowledge that is supplied here that people think that you should be aware of in order to be awakened. So who is Champ Parinya, the artist? He's a yogi, a researcher, and a freelance graphic designer. He got a BFA from UC Irvine in graphic design. And similarly to Dylan Monroe, the previous artist, he credits a particular moment in his life for kind of sending him down the rabbit hole too. In between freelancing gigs, he went on YouTube, like he was just killing time. He found a YouTube video about an interdimensional hexagonal cloud formation on Saturn. And then literally from that moment on, he's been researching conspiracies ever since. This was in 2008, so it's been a long time. I looked into it. There is a cloud on Saturn that is in the shape of a hexagon, which is really cool, but it's not interdimensional. That part is false. So I just found that really interesting. He's in between gigs, he's just surfing the internet, he finds one video, and he said, he got so upset that he felt that this information had been withheld from him, from the school system, from NASA even, that since then he made it his calling to look into kind of like esoteric or withheld knowledge. So let's see. So, okay, why are these being made? How can we better understand them? How does this form of digital information gathering and art making connect with maybe some of the impulses behind January 6th and before that? So there's a few ways that I've come to understand them. And I'm going to keep it pretty simple. I don't want to get into like theory or anything. But so the first kind of bullet point that I have is there's a sociologist, Gil Ayal, who's written a lot about a lack of trust in experts. And I think to all of us that should feel palpable right now. On each of the images that I showed you, any institution that you could really think of that ostensibly would hire, experts in their respective fields, all of these institutions are implicated in what is believed to be like this vast conspiratorial network. You'll find the CIA, the FBI, NASA, the NSA, CNN, Google, Amazon, Facebook, the Vatican, it's all on there, and they're all implicated kind of in this vast conspiracy. And so why is this? Ayal kind of attributes it to the fact that the nature of being an expert to many people has now changed. You don't need the backing of an institution to be an expert anymore. In some ways, that can even lessen your credibility. So the shift in this nature of expertise has eroded trust in what we might consider traditional experts. So expertise now is more abstract. Some people might think you don't need practical or tangible skills to be an expert. You could draw on a broad base of general skills, as in like being an expert at esoteric and internet research. Additionally, because of the way that we're all interconnected now, expertise is it can be more diffuse, and it can be more of a network rather than being centered on the individual, right? So there's so many sources of information online and, anywhere. We have more access to sources, of information than any point in humanity ever. Whether or not those sources are all good is another question, that's a separate question. So in addition to just the vastness of information and the way in which we can rely on other people to fill in the gaps of our own kind of, the gaps in our own knowledge bases, expertise is more diffuse. It might be considered more of a network. And so I think this really holds true for these images because, the knowledge represented on them is pretty abstract. There is no real evidence to support that the pyramids were built by aliens, for example. And because it is literally a network of references, I think this diffusion of expertise and a real shift in what it means to be an expert now kind of speaks to what we're seeing with these images. Another kind of point that I wanted to touch on was the philosopher Theodor Adorno. He's talked at length about what's called the schematization of mass culture, which really just means that the information economy that we live in now, it necessitates that we are constantly processing and absorbing and organizing information. It's overwhelming. And so what does this mean for an experience with a work of art? It means it's less about an aesthetic experience or an emotional experience, but it's more about gathering information as related to that work of art. So the more you know about a work of art, the smarter you'll be relative to other people, right? So, the goal is to know more than someone else about something. So the act of acquiring pieces of information is the focus, and it translates to this kind of competitive hierarchical ranking of what you know versus what everyone else knows. The awakened versus those who are not yet awakened. And I think this tends to be the case again with these images. The artwork is literally, it's literally information. The work is information. That's the whole point. So, and there is that competitive element with these images. The point is to ascend to a certain level above everyone else. And then a final way to think about these is kind of from their aesthetic components. So there's this art historian, Pam Lee, who's delved into a lot of aspects of how the freelance economy has impacted the way that people work, and especially the way that artists work now. Like gig labor and freelance labor, it's reoriented, work outwards from like the corporate office center or just from the office space. We all know, Tess and I are at home right now. I'm working and I'm at home. You can do that now, and people do it. And so I want to reemphasize that the two artists that I talked about, at the time they made these images, they were freelancing. So this kind of relatively new freelance economy lends itself really well to going down the rabbit hole. I don't mean that freelancing is inherently bad. I just mean that it's probably a lot easier to do kind of deep conspiracy related research from home rather than in an office setting without someone looking over your shoulder. You know what I mean? So additionally, Pam Lee talks about the tools that a lot of people use, but also like freelance artists use as well pretty frequently, and how those tools actually really lend themselves well to images like the ones that we looked at. So Adobe Illustrator, for example, or like Photoshop, all those tools, freelancers use them constantly. I use them in my job too. But the software is ideal for making images like the ones that we just looked at. So graphics in Illustrator, just the way that they're kind of set up, they're infinitely scalable. So you can zoom in really close to get really good detail without losing resolution or like image quality. And you can also zoom out. And also the nature of those images, like if you save it as a PDF on your computer, that means you can circulate it, to everyone. So it's these tools coupled with the structure of work, kind of inherent to the freelance economy, that makes it easy to put together something like this and do a lot of the research that's necessary to compile it. On top of that, super easy to circulate these online. It's also very easy to circulate them in like the physical space as well, which is what these artists have done. So on Illustrator, you can make a poster. You can just as easily and for a very low budget, slap it on a t-shirt or a backpack or a pair of pants, and it's free publicity. So we see like with this, the digital image can very easily be translated into physical space due to the ease of which you can accomplish these things with the tools that we have at our disposal today. So it's free publicity. And what's lost in kind of depth with a program like Illustrator, it lends itself really well to these images. They're two-dimensional in both format kind of, and honestly, in a sense, in the quality of the imagery of the content presented as well. It's like these vague oblique references. So those are just a few ways to think about these images and why they exist. Kind of an erosion of the traditional sense of expertise, the constant need to be absorbing and organizing information that we kind of collect from the media, and from the nature of work today and the tools that we have at our disposal, artists in particular. So very quickly, my last thing that I want to talk about is an example of an artist who predates QAnon, who predates Trump, but still deals in themes of conspiracy. And this artist, her name is Suzanne Treister. She's chosen to limit herself to physical material, not the digital, like literally just pen and paper. She never widely distributed her work online. She has not tried to recruit anyone or awaken anyone with any kind of ideology. I'm really showing you this artist because I want to emphasize that artwork related to conspiracy predates, 2016. And not all of it is necessarily like nefarious. So major institutions like the Whitney, the Tate Museum, the Met, they either have in their collections or exhibit work that has to deal with conspiracy. So it's just something interesting to think about. So Suzanne Treister, she explores some really eccentric theories in her work, but the key difference between her and someone like the two artists that I showed earlier is that she adopts a character when she does it. So she has an alter ego, which kind of creates that distance between being a real believer and being someone who's just engaging with these kinds of things critically. So her alter ego, her name is Rosalind Brodsky, and she's a time-traveling scientist who maps out the connections between the occult, the military, and mind control. So here's a photo of her, and I included this photo to kind of speak to the absurdity that's at the heart of her work. She'll Photoshop herself in character into these ridiculous scenarios. So this is her on the set of Schindler's List with Liam Neeson. So, I point this out just to say that she's aware of the humor that's inherent to a lot of this, and that it can't always be taken 100% seriously. I will point out, though, that much of the information that she presents in her work is actually real in a certain sense. I'll show you in a second. But the difference is that the significance of the coincidences and the connections that she makes is really exaggerated. So this is what I mean. Okay, so like the artist that I showed you before, Suzanne Treister is an expert at making these massive scale drawings. I mean, this one is huge. I have a poster of it, and it's just it's like the size of a wall. It's crazy. So this is from a project where she, again, is mapping out connections between the military, the occult, and mind control technologies. So I will, and again, she's doing this all in performance as a character. So I'll show you a detail to illustrate what I mean. So, and when I said the connections that she's making are kind of ridiculous, this example will explain that. So here, this is right in the center of her drawing, and I circled it in red. She's connecting the Wizard of Oz with West Point, because she's saying that the Wizard of Oz was filmed at West Point. Okay. Therefore, she's connecting that film with the US military. Then she says, MGM, the film studio, produced The Wizard of Oz. Okay. MGM also made a movie in 1994 called Stargate. Okay, I watched it recently. It's really not that good. But anyway, she says, everything I'm saying is real. She says, then from 1978 to 1995, the CIA had a program called the Stargate program. So she's connecting this MGM film with the CIA program. And the CIA program Stargate was, it was investigations into paranormal psychic phenomena for the use of mind control by the United States military. It's real. You can look it up. It existed. If there's a movie with George Clooney that came out called The Men Who Stare at Goats. There's a book about it as well. That's the Stargate program. So it's, it is history. But so she makes all these remarkable kind of connections, and you start to think, oh my God, the CIA was really doing this, and how does it connect to the US military? And the Wizard of Oz was filmed at West Point. And so she's making a larger point about, kind of goings on with the state or with the military that she thinks you might want to know about. However, fun fact, when I was putting this presentation together, I realized that there's stuff in the Athenaeum collections that kind of debunk her entire premise. I wasn't expecting to find this, but this is kind of cool. So if you know Paul Cray, we have Paul Cray's collection at the Athenaeum. And in the 30s, he was responsible for some expansions to West Point. And so if you look in all the documents, lots of photographs of West Point, plans of the campus, all that good stuff. The building that Suzanne Treister contends that was filmed, that they used to film The Wizard of Oz, it's not on West Point's campus. I don't even think they went anywhere near the Hudson Valley. They may have gotten some inspiration from the area, in researching for the movie, but it didn't happen. So if we go back, at the center here, the Wizard of Oz kind of node in this map, the rug is pulled right out from under it. So all that to say, you can do some pretty cool things with what we have in our collection at the Athenaeum. So that kind of wraps up what I have. I just want to emphasize that places like the Athenaeum, and I hope that I kind of made this kind of clear, places like the Athenaeum, though you might not think it at the outset, one way or another, they are kind of wrapped up into these complicated and sometimes really troubling, but I think always fascinating images and the theories and the ideologies that play into them. So you can draw a through line between, objects from our collections and things that are happening, with these urgent current events that are happening literally today with the Gearins. Or you can also like debunk, you can have a ton of fun debunking some theories that you come across online too. So that's all I have. If anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. I hope that was entertaining.
Thank you, Natalie. It's been really interesting. I love how you pulled some things out of our collection too. So Constance has a question to start. If there's anything you can, if you're able to respond. She's wondering if you can speak a bit more to the impact of conspiracy thinking on architecture, roads, bridges, and buildings.
Yes. So I don't have an image of it in this presentation, but I would say a place where architecture and conspiracy really comes together is with government buildings. So Suzanne Treister, the artist that I showed you earlier, the illustrator, she has an entire architectural history of MI6, for example. So like the British, like CIA, the equivalent, I guess. So she draws a through line between just using examples of architecture from history. She tries to draw a through line between like the occult and Aleister Crowley to the present day MI6 building in London. So I think the real kind of connection point between these two kind of spheres of thinking, conspiracy and architecture, is the architecture of government buildings, and particularly like agency buildings, like FBI, CIA, those kind of things. People will delve into those buildings really closely to try to uncover, legitimate or not, try to uncover like secrets about those agencies.
Thank you. Constance said that was fascinating. And Tess is wondering what role archives can play in preventing or debunking conspiracy. For example, as she notes, the Athenaeum took down a number of public images of the Capitol building after January 6th, since we have all the plans. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do we monitor who uses our collection?
That's a great question. I mean, this is something I wrestle with because it draws a fine line. You don't want to limit access. It's hard to limit access to your collections, like as an institution, these great things that we have are meant to be shared. And so it's unfortunate, that we did have to pull the plans of the Capitol from like online access so that people can't just look them up and then plan another insurrection or something. So it's walking a fine line. I do think that having such detailed plans available for free online can lead to some problems. I think maybe the best approach to try and mitigate some of these things so that like collections aren't used for nefarious purposes is to like really establish dialogues between the people managing the collections and stewarding them and the people who are using them, so where you might not want to have maps of the Capitol online, I think it's perfectly acceptable to reach out to a curator and say, hi, this is what I'm working on. This is my, this is my interest. This is my background and this is kind of credibility I have. Can I please see the plans of the Capitol? And, I think it's up to the discretion of the institution too. But yeah, I don't know. As someone who wants to share as much information as I can with the public, it's a tricky line to walk, I think. It's a good question.
That's a great question. And obviously that we all grapple with. You're if you are a special collections library with anything that could be connected into conspiracy theories or, you know, challenge the sanctity or safety of public spaces. Jay is wondering if that's, you know, fascinating underground artwork. And he wonders, without the ability to profit from their artwork, if you think that these artists would pursue their projects, their subjects and projects.
That's a great question. My gut is to say yes. I think even if it wasn't profitable, they would continue to pursue this work. And I say that for a variety of reasons. Number one is that time and time again, over the course of years, their shops have been shut down, their Instagrams have been banned, their Facebook accounts have been banned, their Twitter accounts have been banned. So really the window through which they can profit off of this stuff has been narrowing considerably just because of crackdowns with people who promote this kind of content. Despite all that, they're still, both of them, and there's more people who make this kind of artwork. Those are just the two kind of best examples that I wanted to show. But despite all the crackdowns and like the real lessening ability to make money off of this stuff, they're still very enthusiastic about promoting it, even if it's no longer super viable. Another reason why I think they would continue to pursue it, even if it wasn't making them like a single dollar, is that the impulse behind it is one of like awakening the public. The mission here is to awaken all of humanity to like perceived truths about what they believe is really going on. And that's like just as much of a political kind of mission to them as it is a spiritual one, and kind of like a spiritual kind of mission, really. So yeah, I do think it's a calling that they have beyond just making money.
Interesting. And I guess kind of related to this is your own work and working with them. Catherine wonders if there was ever a time looking at these images that you just had to step away for a bit due to the type of information they had that just drove you crazy.
Yes. When I was working with all this stuff, it was during like the height of COVID. I really started to, when I first became interested in this kind of thing, it was like late spring, early summer 2020. So it was COVID. And like, it just speaks to the power of these images. Like I went down the rabbit hole myself from a critical perspective, not as a believer, but still it was just something about like the isolation and being on the computer all the time that drew me to research this kind of stuff. So yes, there were many instances where I kind of felt like I was going to start going crazy. There were specific instances where after the 2020 election, where the whole dispute about the election, it was so drawn out, and like day after day, there were theories that I knew had originated with QAnon that were trickling down through like news outlets like Fox News, where millions of people get their information from. And I knew where the information had originated from, and I knew that it was totally bunk, but it was being reported on the news as fact. And so those instances, it was just like the dissonance was really starting to make me mad. And so I had to like pause multiple times.
I can only imagine. Doing any kind of historical work is always challenging. It's, as you read about things that just don't feel right. So that's fascinating, especially when it connected right to what was going on at that time. Shane is wondering, and I'm thinking he's referring to, so he asked if you think architectural preservation or destruction, whether for economic or political reasons, is related to conspiracy. I'm thinking he's, I asked him to clarify. I'm thinking he's wondering if, can lead to the emergence of conspiracy theories.
I think it can. I'm trying to think of an example. So you said preservation and like destruction?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, I think like construction is one thing. Like the example earlier with the first artist, Dylan Monroe, it was the construction of one world trade and seeing that go up that made him specifically go down the rabbit hole. Preservation, I would be curious. I need to look more into it because I don't have any examples off the top of my head. So yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. And I actually think that that's something that our collections would lend themselves really well to. I bet we have plenty in our collections. If I was to really dig into these, conspiracy maps again, I bet there's overlap between our collections and these images that would speak more to that. There's also, actually, there is one example. The Freemasons, they show up on these maps a lot, being implicated. And so the construction and preservation of Freemason lodges is something that's highly contested. I didn't think of that right off the bat, but people are very suspicious about the existence and the preservation of Freemason lodges. So.
Well, thank you. Are there any other questions anybody has they want to share? Well, you know where to find Natalie if you have any further questions that come to you after the fact and want to speak with our own resident expert on the aesthetics of conspiracy theories online. And want to thank you, Natalie, for doing this presentation in the midst of your busy workday. This has been wonderful, and hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.